Women of Wyoming Then and Now is brought to you by the Wyoming Historical Society and supported in part by a grant from the Wyoming Cultural Trust Fund, a program of the Department of State Parks and Cultural Resources. This program features unique female perspectives on events, themes, or narratives related to state history. We, the host, believe that one woman's action toward a better future can result in a greater legacy that inspires and equips many generations of women to come.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Linda Fabian, the Executive Director of the Wyoming Historical Society, and today's host of Women of Wyoming Then and Now. Joining us as co-host is Janelle Molony.
So I'm Janelle Molony. I am the Oral History Committee Chair with the Wyoming History Society, and I'm super excited to be able to introduce for you our guest is Aileen Gronewold. She is a family researcher who's in Missouri, but she has very deep roots from pre-territorial Wyoming history. And she's sharing with us today a look back at the Slack and Bloom families who are neighboring homesteaders. And we're going to talk a little bit about some mental health practices and perspectives from the very early 1900s. I'm very excited to hear what you have to share with us today, Aileen.
Well, thank you, Janelle. People who know me probably think I'm a little bit ridiculous because of how important my Wyoming heritage is to me. That I'm a third generation Wyoming native means so much to me, and my roots are forever in Wyoming. My great-grandfather, Wesley Bloom, came to Wyoming before 1880, and he homesteaded in three different places, in Bighorn and Cody and Pinedale. But in each of those places, his homesteads predated the incorporation of those towns. So he was, it was before there were towns there. And he was a rancher, he was a hunter, he was a guide. He led a lot of hunting expeditions with Buffalo Bill Cody, and was really quite well known in the area. But his wife, I think she always had some struggles with mental illness. It's been a challenge to determine, was she just slow? Did she have a lack of intelligence, or was it more than that? So as I've been able to piece together bits and pieces of information, I find conflicting accounts, but I think that she did have a serious mental illness. But those are the questions that kept coming up for me.
Well, we're so glad that you're able to visit with us about it. We have already appreciated all the things that you've done in your life as far as your family history research has gone. And we're wondering if for our listeners, could you tell us something about what you think will impact future perspectives on Wyoming history, and maybe especially for women?
As I got into it further and realized just how important their stories were to the history of Wyoming, I had a desire to share that more broadly than just with my family. So 1880 is the first documented account that I have of Wesley Bloom. But he married in 1885. They moved to Cody. His first wife and baby drowned in the Stinking Water River when they were crossing it. He was left widowed with two other children. He was a prominent member in the Cody area, and again, led hunting expeditions with the governor and with Buffalo Bill Cody, was very well liked.
It makes me curious how your great-grandfather Wesley and Melissa met each other, and what capacity she had at that time. Did he know about her
The only clue I have about that is family oral history. They had adjoining homesteads in Cody, and I found that just by looking at the homestead records. I have some photos from Cody where they loved their social get-togethers, and so George Marquette was a great fiddle player, and they would have big dances, New Year's Eve and whatnot. And so there's a picture of a big group of them who were having a social event, and Wesley and Melissa's names are both listed as attendees at that dance. Their families living that close would have known each other quite well. Mm-hmm. And it was understood in the family that Wesley Bloom married Melissa in part because he felt sorry for her. She was only 16, and so it was, he was much older. He had been widowed for 4 years by that point and raising 2 children on his own. So there's just the practical consideration too, that he probably needed help. So but there was something there. Yeah. And I believe that they had a happy home. They had 4 children. My grandmother is the youngest. One of the things I knew is that Melissa had a younger sister named Jennie, and Jennie was committed to the Insane Asylum in Evanston somewhere between 1910 and 1920. She had 3 sons, and her last one had died. I don't know the circumstances, but it was, I believe, shortly after that she was committed to the home in Evanston, and she lived there for 50 years until she died. And her husband remarried and had another whole family. It's like she was forgotten. And I don't know anything about Jennie other than here's a large family, but had two children who were institutionalized for most of their adult lives. And it just raises questions.
We're so lucky to have people like you who are helping to preserve not only your family memories, but memories of women in Wyoming.
Yes.
And their life, and the whole mental illness aspect is so different from some of the other women that we've been learning about who were self-sufficient and were able to go on and do great things. However, with Melissa and your great grandpa's family history, it's teaching us another side of people in Wyoming. Did you have a photograph of your great grandparents that you wanted to?
I did. I hope the glare is not too bad. This was probably 1899. They were married in 1897 in Red Lodge, Montana. And her husband died in 1909. She was they appointed a guardian for her to manage her financial affairs. She had 4 children at that time. The oldest 2 went to the children's home in Laramie, and the younger 2 she kept with her and moved to Cheyenne. Her guardian was a local attorney in Cheyenne. So she lived independently for 5 years until she had some kind of mental breakdown. And they did a sanity hearing. And I was able to find at the Wyoming State Archive the record of the psychiatrist's assessment of her and the names of the 5 men who served on that as the sanity jurors. And
wait a second, 5 men deciding for the 1 female? I just wanted to throw that out there. Okay.
It was, yes, that's the way it worked. So based on the scrawled comments that I was able to find from the psychiatrist who did the assessment, it seemed to clearly indicate that she was paranoid delusional. And the court order was written in for her to be committed to the Insane Asylum in Evanston. But at some point that was scratched out and Lander was written above it.
She was, I don't know if incarcerated is the right word, Um, Where did the children go in the 1910s?
The youngest two, Otto and Marjorie, went with their mother to Cheyenne. After Melissa was committed and sent to Lander, the two little children, Otto and Marjorie, were also sent to the children's home in Laramie. And so my grandmother spent most of her childhood in the children's home.
I am so curious about why did Melissa Slack even end up in Lander in the first place? So if she's having mental health struggles, Evanston is better equipped for that kind of care.
Mm-hmm.
But she ended up not just at Lander. For the viewers, she ended up at the Wyoming School for Defectives, as it was called. It opened in 1912, and it was equipped. It replaced a poor farm, and it equipped the feeble-minded, as they called them, or the retarded, or the epileptic. But it sounds like, because of the evidence we have, that she was none of the above. So I'm curious, what kind of human experience would she have had at the School for Defectives as an adult? Because that school was designed for children also. So
it's you've nailed one of my questions too. Was she just mentally slow, or was she mentally ill? And that was a question that I wanted to get answered. And I think that the notes that I found on her sanity hearing would indicate that she had a true psychotic condition. However, again, why not the insane asylum? That would have seemed a better fit. And it's obviously what they intended to do, because they just crossed it out and wrote in the other facility. So I was able to get the record of her time in that home. And so this piece of paper sums up 25 years of Melissa Bloom's life. And it does have some pretty fascinating information, even though there's not a whole lot there. I know that she worked in the sewing room and the laundry, so she was productive to some degree. There is information here about psychological testing that they did. So I went to my friend Google and looked up 1920s psychological assessment. And of course, that was a really, really formative period of time in what we understand about mental illness, about intelligence. So one of the pieces of information on here, they did assessments in 1920 and again in 1932. Now, she was admitted in 1914. So it wasn't until 1920 that they did any kind of psychological assessment. And then they did another one in 1932. But there's one piece of information on here under the column that says MA. And I believe that refers to mental age. I don't know what caused her to be assessed as a mental age of basically an 8-year-old. I have a few letters from the administrator. And in one case, after she had gone to live with her family and had this psychotic break again, and they tried to get her back into the home in Lander, and they wouldn't take her. And the administrator said, and she never belonged here in the first place. I wish I could know more about what she experienced while she was there those 25 years, but I found that it was much more difficult to find very much information about her.
We've seen that frequently, where the men's historical records are a lot more accessible, or at least better documented, whereas the women tend to be the ones who are the collectors and the documentors sometimes. So they're behind the scenes of the camera. I'm really excited that you are trying to get those stories to become a little bit more visible.
How do you see that your research and your project will be interpreted perhaps in the future? I mean, what kind of a legacy will your research leave?
Well, one of the things that I feel compelled about pursuing this research is that the women that we hear the most about in Wyoming history are the ones who fit a certain narrative, that they were, tough old gals, the true grit kind of story. These were pioneer women who survived incredible challenges and, survived and thrived in a very, very harsh and unwelcoming climate. So I like those stories, but what about the women who didn't? What about the women who struggled mightily with mental illness? What about the woman who murdered her husband with an axe? What about the woman who drowned herself in Trout Creek? Those are valid stories, but we don't hear them very much because for the most part, we don't know those stories. It's important to me that her voice has a chance to be heard.
So far, this story is absolutely intriguing, and I can see why people would just want to learn more. But what you've discovered is that that's an incredibly difficult task. And so I'm hoping you'll be able to share with us what it means to piece together, as you've said, piece together the past in a very responsible way with impersonal data points.
Right.
So I'm glad that you're able to share some of your advice and wisdom with our watchers today.
And I do have the advantage of she lived longer than Wesley Bloom. She lived until 1964. And so I had the ability to talk to family members who knew her. And of course, my mother had a lot of memories of her. And so I had some firsthand accounts of things that I wouldn't have found in any other way. Janelle, I had told you about one of the keepsakes that I have. I have a couple of things from her. She must have been good with a needle. I have a little bag of all of these crocheted. These are for pillowcases.
Beautiful.
And I have a whole bag of them. They were in my mother's cedar chest. But the other thing I have, and I told you about this, is just this little handmade booklet, handwritten, of her handwriting. And these are things that she wrote when she was at the home in Lander. And at first I thought they look like song lyrics because some of them, have like chorus. And so, they're song lyrics. Some of them are like little short stories. And then as I looked at these lyrics, I thought, these are not songs from the day. She was writing songs. Oh. So I believe that this is one of the ways that she spent her time.
No 7 or 8-year-old is producing what she's done.
No. And it also, a lot of the things that she wrote in here are very dark, but some of them are just really tragically sad. One of them talks about, I wonder if they're missing me at home. I wonder if someone is thinking of me and saying, I wish she was here.
It was her coping mechanism.
After she'd been in Lander for 25 years, they took her, and tried to keep her with them. The 3 daughters in the family.
Well, you have some wonderful primary resources. And
yes.
And I think that is what provides us with historical data.
Right.
That's so valuable to the citizens of Wyoming and beyond. It's so intriguing, but it also has to be a personal impact on you as you read some of those difficulties that family members had to go through without the knowledge of those kinds of illnesses that we have today.
But also, I love how you point out that remembering the ugly or the contradictory stories of people in our past is also completely a fascinating adventure for a researcher, first off, but completely valid for preservation. These folks with Black marks to their name are most of the fascinating characters we have these days. If you think about the Wild West, we have legendary criminals, you know? And
Yes, yes.
so it's not something to be embarrassed and put away and shied from. It's something that's also fascinating for us as human experiences. So I'm curious what advice you would have for someone who might have someone in their family tree or someone they're researching where we're missing the heartbeat and we only have that impersonal data. What advice can you give for weaving together some basic narrative so that way we can see a picture, even if it's just a mental picture of where we come from?
Well, you can certainly go through all of the normal channels to find whatever documentation exists that would give you clues. But the best resources for me to fill in that human element have come through oral history, letters that I have between my ancestors, little things. Like I made a special trip to Denver to see this last living great aunt and visit with her. So conversations with people are the most important thing you can do. And time is of the essence, because for anything that's very far back in history, those stories will be lost if they're not captured. The other thing is just encouraging people to look through what they have in their own, keepsakes. My mother's cedar chest held all of these little memories, and I didn't know what they were. They weren't my memories. And so fortunately, my mom lived with me for 6 years before she passed, and we had lots of opportunities to talk. And so she told me stories and I documented things, but those are the best places to find information.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's where we get the juiciest details.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But then, then just kind of following rabbit trails that you find in your research. One little line in a document or something can send you down a whole trail.
Well, I just want to encourage you, Aileen, and those who are listening to continue speaking up for those who had their voices removed, or speaking up for those who have disappeared. And we can still tell their story, and their legacy can live on. And that's one incredible privilege we have as historians, is to finish that task. So thank you for doing that today.
This whole project that we're working on is an effort to preserve and protect those memories, especially of Wyoming women. And you've been such a great help to us, Aileen.
Oh, thank you.
It's just been such a joy to meet you and to hear your story. Unbelievable.
Thank you.
Aileen, we are so delighted that you joined us today and that you have this opportunity today to share that information, and that we have the opportunity to promote these stories. And for our watchers, we're going to include some helpful links and resources with the video. So if you want to follow up or dig a little bit deeper into your past, you can too. Thank you so much for joining us today. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye. Thank you so much,
Bye.
Aileen. It was a pleasure to meet you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. This has been wonderful. I appreciate your interest.